Today we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one in particular will give you the creeps since the human body is contorted in ways it's not meant to be, while the other one is about a cave that lives up to its name. As always, viewer discretion is advised. The entrance to Bouverie Cave was unremarkable, a narrow opening tucked away in the remote wilderness of the southern highlands. Beneath it, however, lay a labyrinth of twisting tunnels, sheer drops, and fragile rock formations. The cave was rarely visited, its delicate ecosystem carefully preserved behind locked metal gates. In May 2008, Jeffrey McDonnell, an experienced spelunker and photographer, got the hold of the key. He arrived ahead of his group on a Friday, eager to explore and capture the cave's stunning formations. The descent started smoothly. His wire and metal collapsible ladder took him down into the first chamber, where the air was still and thick with damp mineral scent. His headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating jagged limestone walls, slick with condensation. Jeffrey's goal was an isolated chamber, a rarely seen space deep within the system. To reach it, he had to squeeze through a vertical crack, narrow, suffocating, barely wide enough for his body. He maneuvered feet first, angling his body downward, bracing himself against the stone. Then, the rocks shifted. With a sickening crunch, two heavy slabs of limestone broke loose and squeezed him. One struck his hip, pinning him in place. The other wedged against his shoulder, locking him in a vise of unyielding stone. His chest was compressed, his arms trapped at his sides. The cold rock bit into his flesh, and in an instant, his situation had gone from difficult to dire. The position the slabs pinned him in twisted his body in a deformed position, not what a human body is meant to be in. Jeffrey exhaled sharply, trying to shift his weight. Nothing. His legs were useless beneath him, pinned at an awkward angle. He tried again, harder this time, twisting with everything he had. The rock refused to budge. Panic crept in. He shouted, but the stone absorbed his voice. No one was coming. Not yet. Jeffrey had prepared for many scenarios underground, but not this. He had no partner, no backup plan. His only option was to endure. Outside, everyone was oblivious to the disaster that was unfolding within the Bouverie cave. Others who had to join him were busy in their preparations. No one knew about Jeffrey and his whereabouts. In fact, on the very same day, nobody even noticed him being gone. Back in the cave, time blurred. The cave swallowed sound, leaving him in deafening silence. Only his breathing, shallow, rapid, filled the void. He knew he couldn't last long like this. Blood flow to his legs was restricted. His shoulder throbbed. The cold seeped into his bones, pulling his body into a slow, creeping numbness. He was wearing nylon overalls, designed to retain heat. They failed against the sheer dampness of the cave. At some point, exhaustion took over. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his body shutting down to conserve energy. Sometime on Saturday, dehydration set in. His tongue felt thick, his throat raw, his muscles twitched involuntarily, a warning sign of his body's weakening state. He had no food, no water, only the crushing weight of the rocks and the endless black. How long had it been? It wasn't until late Saturday morning that anyone realized something was wrong. He never joined his group in the morning, no contact whatsoever. By the time his absence was noticed, it was already too late for a simple rescue. The group had assumed he was exploring alone, but when they saw his camping gear untouched Saturday morning, a sick realization hit. His camera equipment was missing, as was his caving gear. By noon, the rangers were alerted, and by early Sunday morning, search teams arrived at Bouverie Cave. The rescuers had a hunch. Jeffrey was known for his love of photographing rare formations. If he had entered any cave alone, it was likely this one. There were over 400 caves in the area, and one stood out: Bouverie Cave. It was beautiful, fragile, and rarely visited. Jeffrey had mentioned it before, describing its hidden chambers and unique formations. If he had ventured inside, he was alone, and no one knew how far he had gone. Rescuers moved fast. The cave entrance was secured with a metal gate to keep out inexperienced explorers. A key was needed to enter. When the search team arrived, the gate was unlocked, a clear sign Jeffrey had gone inside. Beyond the entrance, the cave descended sharply, leading into a vast chamber with a cold underground stream snaking through its floor. Rescuers scanned the walls, looking for any signs of movement, but the darkness swallowed their light. The first real clue came from above. A wire and metal collapsible ladder anchored near a tight vertical crack. At 9 a.m., one of them spotted it, his pack, abandoned near the entrance of a vertical crack. Cautiously, a rescuer peered down. His headlamp flickered against damp rock, illuminating the tight crevice below. Then, a glimpse, just beyond the shadows, his helmet. He was still alive, barely. Jeffrey was barely conscious. His words were incoherent, his breath shallow. Hypothermia had him in its grip. The team had to act fast. He was in sheer pain, his limbs twisted awkwardly. The first priority was freeing him. But it wasn't simple. His body was pinned in such a way that every movement risked worsening his condition. Rescuers tried to maneuver around the jagged rock. The space was impossibly tight, barely wide enough for a man to reach in. The first rock, the one pinning his shoulder, had some give. It took every ounce of strength to shift it just enough to free his upper body. Then came the second rock, the one crushing his hip. It wouldn't move. They tried to dig around it, but the risk was too high. If they dislodged too much, the unstable limestone could collapse further. Every move was a gamble. Above ground, reinforcements arrived. Over 100 men and women, police rescue, ambulance teams, and cave rescue volunteers mobilized for what would be one of the most grueling extractions in Australian caving history. Airbags were brought in, heavy-duty inflatable cushions designed to shift massive rocks without causing cave-ins. Rescuers wedged them into the crevice and slowly inflated them, forcing the stone apart millimeter by millimeter. It took hours. Jeffrey remained semi-conscious, slipping in and out of awareness. His body was failing, his temperature dropping dangerously low. At last, the final rock gave way. His body, limp and unresponsive, was pulled free. Arms first, dragged carefully through the tight slot that had nearly become his tomb. The battle wasn't over. The cave was a labyrinth of obstacles, each one threatening to trap them again. He had to be rushed to the hospital as soon as possible before his situation got worse. The team rigged vertical haul systems, attaching him to a stretcher for the grueling ascent. The passage was barely wide enough. Every movement had to be calculated. They used traverse lines to lift him over jagged boulders the size of cars, careful not to jolt him. The walls had to be widened in sections, a slow and dangerous process in the hard rock environment. Rescuers had to work in shifts, exhaustion setting in. The air was thick, stale. Sweat and mud covered their bodies as they pulled, lifted, adjusted. Every inch felt like a battle. The final passage was the worst, a narrow bottleneck, no more than an hourglass pinch of stone. They had to carve space, chiseling away just enough to pass the stretcher through without injuring Jeffrey further. Above them, the surface team waited. At 9:10 p.m. on Sunday, the first rescuer emerged from the cave. Then finally, Jeffrey's stretcher breached the surface. He was barely conscious, his body battered. He needed immediate medical attention. Rescue workers rushed to stabilize him. He was severely dehydrated, suffering from hypothermia, and was on the brink of death. Jeffrey was transported to Goulburn Base Hospital, then to Liverpool Hospital. His condition was serious, but later stable. After 54 hours trapped underground, he had survived. Bouverie Cave had nearly claimed him. Jeffrey would later reflect on his mistake, going alone, underestimating the cave. He had survived by sheer luck and the skill of the rescuers who refused to leave him behind. This next story is equally devastating. Some cave names serve as a warning, others are an outright omen. Cave Disappointment is one of those places. If a place is named this, you can expect the worst. It's a cave of narrow squeezes, jagged walls, and unforgiving stone. And yet, on July 28th, 4 people entered, planning a simple crossover trip. They thought they knew what to expect. They were wrong. At noon, the group gathered at the cave entrance. Pete Johnson, with him were his 2 sons, Kyle, 10, and Evan, just 7 years old. Rounding out the group was Richard Atwood, a fellow caver with enough experience to feel confident, but not enough to anticipate the nightmare ahead. The plan was simple: enter through Cave Disappointment, navigate the tight corridors, and emerge hours later through Hanor's Cave. A crossover trip, nothing unusual. The clock was ticking though. They had to be out in time for the Helderberg-Hudson Grotto meeting at 4 p.m. At the entrance, they rigged a 50-foot rope, securing it to anchor points before beginning the descent. One by one, they repelled into the darkness. The rock was damp, the air thick and unmoving. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became. At the bottom, they found themselves facing the first obstacle, a narrow 10 to 12-inch wide crack, barely large enough to squeeze through. The passage sloped downward at a sharp 45-degree angle, dropping them into a horizontal chamber 6 feet long. It wasn't a comfortable fit, but it was manageable. At least, that's what they thought. Johnson and his sons maneuvered through the slot first, pressing their bodies against the cold rock, feeling their way down inch by inch. It was tight, suffocating. The walls seemed to squeeze around them, but they made it through. Then it was Atwood's turn. As Atwood slid into the crack, something felt wrong. The stone pressed against his chest and back, making it hard to move. He exhaled, trying to flatten himself. Slowly, he inched forward. Then, he stopped. Something had caught his clothes. A sharp projection of rock dug into his side, pinning him. He twisted, trying to free himself, but the more he moved, the worse it became. The walls seemed to close in. Every shift of his body scraped fabric and skin against the rough stone. His breathing quickened. He tried pushing forward, but there was no space. He tried pulling back, but the rock wouldn't let go. The others waited in the chamber below, expecting him to slide down at any moment. When he didn't, Johnson called up to check. No response. For 30 agonizing minutes, Atwood fought against the cave. He squirmed, struggled, his heart hammering in his chest. Sweat soaked his clothes. Every breath felt shallower. He was wedged in, a human plug in a stone throat. Panic clawed at him. He had to get out. Summoning what little strength he had left, he twisted violently. Something gave way, a sudden shift, and he dropped. He hit the chamber floor hard, gasping. For a moment, he was too stunned to move. Then he realized his problem had only just begun. Johnson and his sons were with Atwood now, but something was terribly wrong. In their descent through the crack, they had unknowingly passed a one-way barrier. The slot was tight enough to let them down, but going back up was a different story. And Atwood was exhausted. The fight to free himself had drained his energy. His limbs were leaden, his fingers trembling. That was when the real horror set in. None of them had the gear to ascend the rope back to the entrance. And Atwood? After his brutal struggle, he was too weak to climb anything. The cave had them now. They were trapped. Johnson knew they had only one option. They needed to get out of the chamber and reach the rope. Using what little supplies they had, he devised a plan. The rappel rope was still in place at the entrance pit. He climbed back up into the main passage and retrieved it. Then, he rigged a makeshift escape, a 30-foot cable ladder tied to the rope. It wasn't ideal, but it was all they had. The boys went first. One at a time, they climbed the ladder. Each movement was slow, deliberate. A wrong step could send them tumbling. When they finally reached the surface, sunlight felt unreal. They had escaped, but Atwood was still inside. Now it was Atwood's turn. He gripped the ladder, his fingers raw and trembling. He pulled himself up, foot by foot. Halfway up, his body gave out. Exhaustion took hold. His muscles locked. He tried again, but there was nothing left. His limbs refused to respond. He was stuck. Again. Time was slipping away. Johnson realized there was no choice. He had to get help. At 2:45 p.m., he hiked back to the truck and drove to the grotto meeting. It was their last hope. By the time Johnson reached the grotto meeting at 3 p.m., his face was set with urgency. He wasted no time explaining the situation. Atwood was still trapped deep in cave disappointment, too weak to climb, stranded in complete darkness. Every second counted. The group of experienced cavers immediately sprang into action, gathering ropes, harnesses, pulleys, and extra lights. They knew the risks. Caves were unpredictable, and exhaustion could turn fatal in an instant. If Atwood had already passed out or suffered an injury, things could go from bad to worse quickly. By 3:30 p.m., the rescue team arrived at the cave entrance. One by one, the rescuers descended. They moved quickly but carefully, navigating the slick walls and unstable rock. They reached the chamber where the boys had been trapped earlier, empty now. Further ahead, the passage narrowed. The jagged slot that had nearly sealed Atwood's fate was waiting. Atwood remained at the base of the shaft, slumped against the cold rock. His breaths were shallow, his body trembling from fatigue and the cold. The struggle had drained him. His clothes were damp with sweat and mud. his arms weak from the repeated attempts to climb. The team quickly assessed the situation. He couldn't climb on his own. The vertical shaft above was too tight for an easy haul, and the jagged walls would make a direct descent dangerous. The cable ladder had already proven ineffective for him. His exhaustion had robbed him of the strength needed to pull himself up. A new plan was needed. The team worked methodically, securing new anchors above the pit and threading heavy-duty ropes through pulleys. The system had to be flawless. If the pulleys failed or a knot slipped, Atwood could fall back down, risking serious injury or worse. Two rescuers positioned themselves near Atwood, guiding the rope through his harness. The first stage of the ascent would be slow, ensuring he didn't swing into the sharp walls or become wedged in an awkward position. Above, the main team braced themselves, ready to haul. The command was given. Atwood lifted off the ground, his body sluggish from exhaustion. His movements were slow, almost involuntary. Inch by inch, he rose. The narrow walls pressed in around him, his shoulders scraping against the rock. Halfway up, the team paused. His breathing was uneven. The strain was obvious. The tight passage forced him into awkward positions. The final section was the hardest. The narrowest part of the shaft squeezed around him. His body contorted uncomfortably as the team pulled him through, each movement deliberate and careful. At the top, the last heave brought him over the edge. Cold air hit his face as he collapsed onto solid ground. The team quickly checked him over. No major injuries, just exhaustion. The rescue had taken longer than expected, but it had worked. The group emerged from the cave as the sun was dipping below the trees. The once quiet woods were now filled with the murmurs of relieved rescuers. Atwood sat on the ground, drinking water, his face pale but alert. Cave disappointment had nearly lived up to its name.